The morning Selena Okafor walked into Hargrove Regional Medical Center's Board of Trustees meeting, she wore her mother's pearl earrings. Not because they were expensive, because her mother had worn them every single day for 19 years, to every 12-hour shift, through every hallway of that hospital. Until the day Hargrove fired her for something she didn't do. Selena had been 23 then. Now she was 41. She had spent 18 years waiting for this moment, and she wasn't going to waste it. The boardroom on the 14th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Columbus, Ohio, the kind of room designed to make you feel small before you even opened your mouth. Dark mahogany table, leather chairs, crystal water pitchers, nobody ever touched, 8 trustees in suits. And at the head of the table, leaning back like a man who had never once been told no in his professional life, Dr. Conrad Vance, Chief Medical Officer and Acting President of Hargrove Regional, the man who had destroyed her mother's career and never lost a single night of sleep over it. He didn't recognize her when she walked in. That was fine. She had counted on that. Selena Okafor had been a labor and delivery nurse for 26 years. 21 of those years at Hargrove Regional. She had delivered thousands of babies. She had held the hands of women who were terrified, who were alone, who were in more pain than language could describe. She had stayed past her shifts. Not because anyone asked her to, not because overtime was being paid, but because she believed that nobody should go through that particular kind of vulnerability without someone steady beside them. The nurses who worked with her called her Mama Ruth. Not sarcastically, with genuine reverence. She was one of the few black nurses in her department with a senior title. She had earned every credential she had, usually while working full-time and raising Selena, alone after Selena's father passed. She studied at night. She recertified ahead of schedule. She documented everything with the kind of precision that comes from knowing that people like her don't get the benefit of the doubt. It didn't matter. In the spring of 2006, a patient filed a complaint alleging that Nurse Okafor had been dismissive and inattentive during a difficult delivery. The baby was healthy. The mother recovered fully. But the complaint triggered an internal investigation, and that investigation was conducted by Dr. Conrad Vance, then head of clinical operations, a man who had, on at least 3 separate occasions, passed Selena over for the charge nurse position she had applied for and been recommended for by her supervisors. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. Selena was not permitted to work during that period. She was not formally suspended. They were careful about the language, but she was reassigned to administrative support pending review, which in practice meant she sat at a desk in a windowless office sorting paper files while her colleagues covered her patients. She cooperated fully. She provided documentation. She requested that her own patient records and shift logs be reviewed. She asked, twice in writing, to meet directly with Dr. Vance to address the specific allegations. He declined, both times. The investigation concluded that Nurse Okafor had demonstrated a pattern of conduct inconsistent with Hargrove's standards of patient-centered care. She was terminated. Her nursing license was flagged with a note referencing the internal finding, which made it nearly impossible to find comparable work elsewhere. She filed a grievance with the State Nursing Board. She filed a complaint with the EEOC. Both processes took years and produced nothing concrete. Selena Okafor was 52 years old when she lost her job. She spent the next 7 years working as a home health aide, a fraction of her former salary, no benefits, no pension, before her heart gave out in the winter of 2013. She died, owing medical bills to the same hospital system that had fired her. Selena had been a second-year nursing student when her mother was terminated. She remembered the specific quality of her mother's voice on the phone that afternoon. Not crying, not angry, just flat. A kind of exhaustion that goes so deep it stops sounding like exhaustion and starts sounding like something worse. They made their decision, Selena had said. Mom, it's done, baby. Don't make a scene. Just finish your program. Selena finished her program. Then she kept going. She got her bachelor's degree, then her master's in healthcare administration, then a second master's in health policy. She took a job with the state health department, then moved to the federal level, eventually landing at the Office of Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services, the federal body responsible for investigating fraud, waste, and abuse in healthcare institutions that received Medicare and Medicaid funding. Hargrove Regional Medical Center received approximately $47 million in federal reimbursements annually. She had not applied for that position by accident. Over the course of 6 years, Selena built a case, not against her mother's firing specifically. That trail had gone cold and she knew it. But she had spent enough time inside healthcare administration to recognize that the kind of institutional culture that destroys a nurse like Selena Okafor doesn't stop at one person. It spreads, it calcifies, it becomes policy. And she was right. The OIG audit she led, technically assigned to her team as a routine compliance review, though Selena had requested the assignment specifically, uncovered 11 years of systematic billing irregularities at Hargrove Regional, inflated procedure codes, duplicate claims, reimbursement requests for services that had not been rendered. More troublingly, a pattern of falsified documentation suggesting that certain quality and safety metrics had been fabricated in order to maintain accreditation standards and federal funding eligibility. The total exposure was estimated at $23 million in fraudulent billing, and every major financial decision at Hargrove Regional for the past 11 years had passed across Dr. Conrad Vance's desk. The Board of Trustees meeting had been called to address what the hospital's communications office described as a routine federal compliance review. The language had been deliberately mild. Dr. Vance had been briefed by the hospital's legal team that the OIG inquiry was likely to result in modest financial penalties and a corrective action plan. Uncomfortable, but manageable. He had been assured that this kind of thing happened all the time. Pay a fine, implement some policy changes, move on. He walked into that boardroom expecting a bureaucratic formality. He had no idea who was coming. Selena arrived with 2 colleagues from the OIG and a federal prosecutor named Assistant U.S. Attorney Diane Ferrara. She carried a leather portfolio and wore a charcoal gray blazer over a white shirt. She set her materials down without ceremony and accepted the glass of water that the board's administrative assistant poured for her. Dr. Vance looked at her across the table. She could see him trying to place her, the flicker of almost recognition that crossed his face when their eyes met. He couldn't get there. She had been 23 when he had signed the paperwork dismissing her mother. She had not been in that building then, and he would not have been looking for her. The board chair, a man named Philip Grosset, opened the meeting with a procedural statement, and then introduced the federal team. When he said Selena's full name and title, she watched Vance's expression shift. Not recognition, not yet, but something. Dr. Vance, Selena said, once the introductions were complete, thank you for making yourself available today. Before we begin, I want to confirm for the record, you are the acting president and CMO of Hargrove Regional, and you have held senior executive authority over clinical and financial operations here since 2009. Is that correct? He confirmed it. His lawyer, sitting 2 seats to his right, made a small note. And prior to 2009, you served as head of clinical operations from approximately 2003 forward. That's so the period covered by our audit, 2013 through 2024, falls entirely within your administrative tenure. He said yes. His voice was even. He was a man who had spent decades being the most important person in every room he entered. He had not yet understood that today was different. Selena opened her portfolio. What followed was not a confrontation in the dramatic sense. There was no shouting. No one pounded the table. Selena did not perform. She simply laid out, methodically, and with precise documentation, the findings of an 18-month federal audit conducted by a team of 7 investigators. She walked through the billing irregularities, claim by claim. She presented internal communications, obtained through the audit's document production process, that showed Hargrove's financial team had flagged discrepancies as early as 2015 and been instructed by senior leadership to reconcile and recode, rather than report. She introduced testimony from 3 current and former Hargrove employees who had raised concerns internally and been told, in varying language, to let it go. She presented the falsified quality metrics. She showed the board the data as reported to federal regulators versus the data that existed in the hospital's own internal records. The gap was not subtle. Through all of this, Dr. Vance said very little. His lawyer said more. There were objections raised. This wasn't a legal proceeding, which meant the objections had no formal standing, but Selena acknowledged each one and continued. It was around the 40-minute mark, when she had finished presenting the billing findings and was transitioning to the quality documentation section, that she paused. I want to take a moment, she said. to speak to something adjacent to this audit, something that isn't part of the formal federal findings, but that I believe this board should be aware of as context. Grosset looked uncertain. Mrs. Okafor. Dr. Okafor, she said without heat. Dr. Okafor, is this relevant to the compliance matter? It speaks to institutional culture, she said, which is directly relevant to the corrective action framework the OIG will be recommending. I'd ask for 5 minutes. The board exchanged glances. No one stopped her. In April of 2006, Selena said, a nurse named Ruthann Okafor was terminated from this hospital following an internal investigation conducted by then Clinical Operations Director Conrad Vance. The investigation was triggered by a single patient complaint. No adverse outcome occurred. The patient's own subsequent statements, which I've reviewed, were far less categorical than the complaint suggested at the time. Nurse Okafor had an unblemished record of 21 years. She's had a charge nurse promotion 3 times and been recommended by her direct supervisors each time. She was passed over each time, and the individual who made those promotion decisions was Dr. Vance. The room was very quiet. Following her termination, Ruthann Okafor was unable to secure comparable employment. Her nursing license was encumbered by the internal finding. She spent the final 7 years of her working life as a home health aide. She died in 2013. She was 59 years old. Selena's voice did not waver. She had practiced keeping it still. Ruthann Okafor was my mother. The silence lasted several seconds. Dr. Vance stared at her. She could see it, finally landing. The name, the face, the calculation. His expression did not crumble. He was too practiced for that. But something behind his eyes shifted in a way that she recognized as the specific rearrangement a person makes when they realize the floor beneath them is no longer solid. I want to be transparent with this board, Selena continued. When this audit was assigned to my team, I disclosed my personal connection to this institution to my supervisors at the OIG. I was advised that the connection was historical and did not constitute a conflict of interest under federal guidelines, provided that my mother's individual case was not part of the formal audit findings, which it is not. Everything I have presented to you today reflects the work of a 7-person team, independently verified, conducted under standard federal audit protocols. My role has been to lead that team and present these findings. The evidence speaks for itself. She closed her portfolio, but I also want this board to understand something. The culture that allows billing fraud to go unreported for 11 years. The culture that tells employees to reconcile and recode instead of flagging irregularities, that is, the same culture that allowed a 26-year veteran nurse with a clean record to be pushed out without a fair investigation, without a meaningful appeal, without anyone in this room asking the question of whether what was happening to her was right. She looked at the board members, not at Vance. Institutions don't develop corrupt practices in isolation. They develop them in environments where certain people's complaints are taken seriously and other people's are not, where certain people are protected and others are exposed. That is the culture this corrective action plan needs to address, not just the billing codes. A USA Ferrara took over after that. She walked the board through the legal exposure, Civil False Claims Act liability, potential criminal referrals for individuals who could be shown to have knowingly participated in the fraud, the timeline for entering into a corporate integrity agreement with the federal government. Dr. Vance's attorney requested a recess. It was granted. During the recess, Selena stood by the window and looked out at Columbus. She thought about her mother taking the bus to work in the dark because they'd had one car and her father needed it for his job. She thought about the pearl earrings on a hook by the bathroom mirror, put on every morning without fail, taken off every night. She thought about the flat voice on the phone. It's done, baby. It wasn't done. It had just taken a long time. When the session resumed, the board chair informed the federal team that Dr. Vance would be placed on immediate administrative leave pending the conclusion of the federal process. The board's outside legal counsel would be conducting an internal review of HR and clinical governance practices going back 15 years. The hospital would be cooperating fully with the OIG's corrective action framework. Dr. Vance left the room without speaking. His attorney spoke for him. That was how those things went. Selena gathered her materials. One of the trustees, a woman named Adezen Wosu, who had been appointed to the board 3 years earlier and had, from the expression on her face throughout the meeting, clearly been unaware of the depth of what she'd been presiding over, caught Selena at the door. "Your mother," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." Selena nodded. She appreciated it. She didn't have a lot of words left. The formal outcomes took another 14 months to fully materialize. Hargrove Regional entered into a $19.2 million settlement with the federal government, not the full $23 million, because some of the older claims fell outside the statute of limitations, but substantial. The settlement included a 5-year corporate integrity agreement, requiring extensive external monitoring and mandatory reporting protocols. Dr. Conrad Vance resigned before the settlement was finalized. He did not face criminal charges. The evidence established institutional negligence and knowing disregard more clearly than it established individual criminal intent. And federal prosecutors made a judgment call about the strength of a criminal case versus the certainty of civil resolution. That was a decision that had been made above Selena's level by people with competing priorities and limited resources, and she had had to make her peace with it. It wasn't everything she had known going in that it probably wouldn't be, but 3 things happened that she had not fully anticipated. First, the OIG's corrective action framework included a specific requirement that Hargrove Regional conduct a formal review of employee terminations from 2000 through 2010, in which internal investigations had been led by the same individual who had held supervisory authority over the affected employee, a narrow parameter, but one that had been drafted with specificity. The review identified 9 cases. Selena Okafor's was one of them. The review found that the investigation had been procedurally deficient and that the termination had not met the hospital's own documented standards at the time. The finding was placed in the hospital's official records. It would not bring her mother back. But it meant that what had happened to her was acknowledged formally by the institution that had done it. The record existed. It could not be undone. Second, 2 of the current and former employees who had testified to the OIG about being told to suppress billing concerns filed whistleblower complaints under the False Claims Act. Under federal law, whistleblowers who contribute to a successful FCA settlement are entitled to a share of the government's recovery. Those employees, both of whom had been lower-level billing staff with far fewer resources than anyone else involved in this story, would each receive a meaningful financial recovery. Selena had not arranged this. She had simply conducted a thorough audit, but she thought about it. Third, the hospital's Board of Trustees, as part of their governance overhaul, established an annual Nursing Excellence Award in partnership with the Ohio Nurses Association. They named it for a nurse who had served the institution for 21 years with distinction, the Selena Okafor Award for Excellence in Patient-Centered Care. Selena attended the first ceremony. She wore the pearl earrings. She sat in the back row, and she did not cry until she was in her car, alone, in the parking garage. And then she cried for a long time, not just for her mother, but for every patient her mother had steadied through the worst hours of their lives, for the career that had been taken, for the years of silence, for every night she had spent building the case in the specific and disciplined way she'd built it because she had known from the beginning that emotional wasn't enough, that personal wasn't enough, that grief was not a legal instrument, and love was not admissible evidence. And the only thing that was going to work was the truth, documented, verified, and laid down in front of people who had no choice but to look at it. She had learned that from her mother. Selena Okafor had documented everything, always, with the precision of someone who knew she wasn't going to get the benefit of the doubt. She had raised a daughter who did the same, and in the end, all that documentation, all those careful, unglamorous records, had built something that 18 years of waiting had finally made into something real. Justice doesn't always arrive on the schedule grief needs it to. It doesn't always look the way you imagined it would. It doesn't undo what was done. Selena knew all of that. She had made her peace with all of that. But it had arrived, and the record was permanent. And her mother's name was on something that would outlast everyone who had ever tried to erase her. That was enough. It had to be enough. And sitting in that parking garage with her mother's earrings still warm against her skin, Selena Okafor decided that it was.